And we will talk about economic calculation, look into what the calculation problem is. So based on what we just talked about, the theory of subjective valuation, that people have different wants and needs, and they try to satisfy those wants and needs based on what they believe will fulfill what they want. Now, economics does not tell them what they should or shouldn't want. Economics simply observes that people want things for their own reasons, okay? And that works into the price. Now, that reality creates for us what is called the calculation problem. Because there are different people with different value preferences and that go about choosing things in a different order than we might to satisfy those wants and needs, that creates a problem called the calculation problem. Okay, so let's talk about what economic calculation is. So economic calculation is the procedure for economizing the division of labor. Basically, that sounds technical, and it is to some extent, but it's actually a fairly simple concept. It's how do we effectively use the labor that we have in an economy? What labor do we devote to what purposes and in what amounts? And how do we break down the job so that it can be most effectively done, right? How do we take advantage of the fact of like we talked about with the guy who tried to build the sandwich totally from scratch. He's benefiting from trade and division of labor. The division of labor is that lots of other people do the small tasks that create the ingredients that go into what makes up a sandwich. That guy can trade and benefit from the other trades that people have made in the economic past and benefit from that trade and division of labor by having the resources to put together a sandwich and not having had to do it from the beginning and end. But an economy has to have some way of figuring out what is the best use of the labor that's available. Because the work that we put into stuff and the time that we put into stuff is not an infinite resource. It's a scarce resource. There's only so much that can be done. And so we can benefit by everybody kind of working on what they specialize in and then trading with one another. But we have to know what areas of need there are. What's the demand for certain labor? So for example, if there's a mechanic, there's a need for people to have their cars fixed. The thing that indicates that is the pay of mechanics. Mechanics are able to charge for their services, whatever it is they charge, because their labor is scarce. There's a limited amount of people who have the knowledge and skill to be able to perform the job of a mechanic. And how do we know what the right amount of mechanics are? How do we know what the right amount of dentists are? How do we know what the right amount of McDonald's workers or farmers or any other job is? How do we know that those who are doing the labor are using the resources efficiently and effectively? So an economy has to decide how labor gets divided. How do we know that mechanic, in one sense, shouldn't be doing something else, right? What is the appropriate amount of people working with mechanical skill? So division of labor breaks a task down into smaller parts and allows for specialization. So this leads to economizing. Okay. Economizing, which is obviously in the name of the subject of economics, leads us to do this process that we do all the time, every day, all the time, every day, which is, you could call it economizing if you want to call it by a verb, one word. But this is the process, okay? It's this line where, which is using lower valued means to achieve higher valued ends, using lower valued means to achieve higher valued ends. It's actually real simple. Think of making a cake. When you're doing that process of making a cake, you have a goal in mind. The goal is, at the end, a cake. Now, in order to make that cake, you have to use means to get to that end. You have to use your time, your labor, maybe, a recipe, and you have to use equipment like an oven, and you have to use ingredients. Now, that ingredients, time, labor, energy, and resources could be used on something else. But what you want is the cake. So you are willing to give up the ingredients, the time, the resources, and the energy in order to get something that you want at the end. So, what you have done is that people give up what is less valuable to them in order to get something that is more valuable to them. We do this all the time. When you go to the store and you purchase something, you're saying in that economic action that the money you're handing over is less valuable to get the thing that you want, which is more valuable. So if you buy a burger at McDonald's, you're saying you're using a lower valued means, which is money, to get a higher valued end in that moment. Now, those means and that end are subjective. The value is subjective in those things. So some people may not agree with you on your preferences, but that's kind of the point here, is that different people are going to prefer different things and at different prices and have different wants. Okay, so we go through this process of calculating what we want all the time and what we're willing to give up to get it. So these calculations help us make our decisions. You have to ask yourself, am I willing to give up, like with the shoes, am I willing to give up $1,000 to get this particular pair of shoes? Some people would say yes. Some people would say no. Some people would say yes at a lower price. Okay. Some people wouldn't care about the shoes at all. But those are the calculations based on the prices that are happening all the time. Okay. So these calculations help us guide us in our decisions. Now, we don't sit around all the time with like a calculator or sitting and think real deeply about this. This is just a process that goes on all the time while we kind of live our lives. Now, this leads us to make decisions. Now, this not only affects us on kind of the buying side of economics, if you will, but also kind of on the selling side, right? It doesn't only affect us when we go to the store and consume, meaning we buy a product or a service, you go pay for a haircut, but it also helps producers figure out how much, where, and when of a resource or a good or service to produce. So remember, with back to the basic fundamentals of economics, that there's the reality of scarcity is rule number one, that we want more than there is. Not everything can be not all wants and needs can be satisfied. So this causes us to have to make choices. So we have a supply of whatever is available, and that's what's available. And then there's a demand, who wants it. Okay. In between those things is a price. And so there comes a price for those different goods and resources. Now, when the price increases of something, that indicates to us that there is less available. Now, it could indicate to us that there's less available to us because there's literally less available, or that more people want the same resource at the same time, or both. When a price is lower, that indicates to us that there is more available, either literally more, or there is more available because less people want the resource at the same time, or both. Now, those realities in prices cause us to calculate and make decisions based on what we want and need. And we make our decisions based on, once our basic level needs are satisfied, we then kind of rank our preferences to what we most want at that moment next. So kind of like a list that's called an ordinal ranking, which is like 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you say, okay, I have water, I have clothing, I have shelter, I have those things, I have food, and I have those things at the level that I am somewhat satisfied with, you're going to want something next, whatever that next thing is. And then underneath that, you'll have things that you would like as well. So we kind of rank our preferences based on that, and we'll have different rankings of different preferences, and no one is right or wrong. Now, businesses follow a similar methodology. They also look at prices to tell them key information about what's going on in an economy, because the prices help them make their decisions of what actions they're going to do or not going to do. So remember, prices are market signals that help us make decisions by telling us about what is available in an economy or what is not available in an economy, what is more or less available. So remember McDonald's, how it decided whether or not to bring back the McRib, is that when pork prices increased, that signal is sent to McDonald's telling them that pork is more expensive because there is either less of it available and or more demand for the resources at the same time somewhere else in the economy. So McDonald's decides to forego making the McRib at that time. And wait, now when the pork price drops, that tells them there's more pork available, either because there's literally more of it that's been produced, or there's less people that want it at the same time, or both. And therefore they bring back the McRib. So businesses, producers, can figure out based on the demand what people want, what millions of people want, where, when, how much, and for how long people want certain goods and services, because they can follow the prices. But if there are no prices in an economy, if an economy is centrally planned and there's like a board of decision makers or central planners who try to plan the right amount of goods and services in an economy without working off of real-time market prices, number one, they run into a problem of lacking information. And number two, they run into this problem of what's called calculation, meaning they can't calculate whether or not it's a good time or a good decision to use resources or not, and in what amounts. They also can't know if they are effectively satisfying the wants and needs of their customers. In fact, they can't even fully know what their customers really want. I mean, they could tell them, but they can't follow supply and demand anymore and can't follow the prices to know what is the best way to do things and what their customers want and need. Okay, so how else would you do this? So if you didn't have a market with prices, you end up with a couple ways of making decisions about how goods and resources can be allocated. You could decide it politically, meaning you could have some sort of representative be voted in to decide what is the right amount of resources for each product and service for each household. But you run into this problem, that the person that you or I might elect to try to make the right decisions about the resources that we need, they have the job that I think might be impossible of trying to hit a moving target, of guessing what is the right amount of goods and services for each purpose. Okay? Because they have in their mind what they know their household does. They may buy a certain amount of milk for their household per week, but they don't know how everybody else ranks milk in level of wants and needs and how important it is and how much. So they would have to basically decide on what they want, but what they want may not be in line with what other people want. And even if it was in line with what other people want, people might change their minds. Okay, so for example, I showed you guys the cat food survey. Some of you may have cats, some of you may not. But if someone was, let's say in Palmdale, trying to centrally plan the economy and goods and services and trying to figure out what is the right amount of goods and services for each of its purposes, and they're trying to help and get people all the right amounts of what they need. Now, let's say they elect someone to figure out what are the right amounts of these things. Now, they send out a survey to everybody in Palmdale like this, and we're just going to look at one item, and we're not going to get into the special brands or anything like that. But they say, okay, here's the survey of cat food in Palmdale, right? In this case, it's just people from our classes. Now, we see already that people have different levels of want and need for cat food. Some people don't need any cat food, and some people guess about 5 pounds a week, and everything in between. But if we average all this out, what this amounts to is basically, I guess you could cut out the zero, but either way, still, if you average it out, what this comes out to is everybody gets about, what, 1.5 pounds of cat food? Which means some people are getting too much cat food and some people are getting too little, which means that you're already in a situation just with this one product that causes waste and unmet needs at the same time in the same economy. And so there's no prices to tell us how much and what kind and for how long and in what amounts of cat food people typically buy. So we basically have, the best we can do is basically get this survey and figure out, okay, how do we average out how many pounds per household of cat food for each of the people in Palmdale? And so you run into this problem. We could also try to do this democratically, where we vote, but now you're having to vote for what kind of shampoo you want, how much your household uses, and what's the appropriate kind, right? Other people may not share your same desire and may vote differently. And then it becomes a competitive situation for weighing some wants and needs against others democratically. But there is a true economic democracy where people can vote with their dollars. That's if you have a price system where people can make the decision economically, meaning individuals can figure, okay, let me go buy this amount of cat food at this price. The price sends a signal to them that helps them calculate and make decisions, and they decide whether or not the cat food is something that they want. On the other side, the producer can look and see, okay, people are either buying cat food or they're not, and this is what the amount they typically buy, and this is the demand for it, and this is what we can reasonably charge for it, and this is what we can we can either see that we're making money from it or that we're not. But otherwise, you're stuck. So entrepreneurs can compare demands for consumer goods made by different consumers. They can see, okay, this group prefers this brand of cat food as opposed to this brand of cat food. More people buy this product over this product. Therefore, the demand can work hand in hand with the prices. But if you don't know the demand or the prices, you basically have to guess at whether or not you're producing the right amount of goods. So in this situation, based on economic decisions, like McDonald's deciding where and when and how much of the McRib to produce, it's possible to calculate what, where, and when, and how much of a scarce resource is used based on the supply, how much is available, and the demand, how many people want it. Otherwise, you run into this calculation problem where you would have to basically be an omniscient mind reader in real time to figure out what people want and need and in what amounts. And then below on here, I have different goods and services that are ranked according to whether people want or need them. And different people would have different wants, okay, or desires for these things, okay? Some people like smoking, some people don't. So it depends on whether or not they like smoking, whether or not they would rank cigarettes on their subjective value preferences. So some people, they smoke regularly, and the very next thing that they want most is a cigarette. Some people don't smoke at all. So cigarettes, to them, subjectively have no value. And so there are these different items for different prices. People will have different preferences. You can follow that and figure out what people want and kind of calculate based on supply and demand. But if you don't have supply and demand and you don't have prices to guide producers in what to make, then it's based on just guesswork. Okay? Pens, $20 bill, car, ice cream. So there's these different things that you could think, okay, which of these items would you guys like or not like? Okay, so entrepreneurs can use net income, meaning how much money they make overall, to make decisions about how to allocate producer goods, meaning they can decide how to get things to people. So to get net income, you do a simple calculation. You look at how much the business has made minus the costs, and that's how much net income has come into the company. If you continue not making net income or not covering your costs, eventually a company will go out of business. So entrepreneurs use net worth to make decisions about changing their enterprises by capital investments. So they look at, okay, how much do I have, assets, minus what I owe, liabilities. And that's their net worth, excuse me. So the system works to calculate goods because producers have a personal financial stake in serving their consumers. So who ultimately determines the price? Well, the consumers do. The people who want something have the most important role in determining a price, because if nobody wants something, the price cannot exist. Okay, so this is what is known in economics as the calculation problem, that if the system did not work off of market prices in real time, there would be no accurate information to guide consumers or producers in knowing what resources are available in what amounts and how to meet people's wants and needs. So that's what's known as the calculation problem